Canadians appeared to be nearly split when it comes to protests having an influence in loosening pandemic restrictions. An Ipsos poll exclusive to Global News conducted after police enforcement began in Ottawa shows 54% of Canadians believe the nationwide trucker protests had at least some effect on provincial governments easing restrictions. The majority of Canadians disapprove of how Justin Trudeau handled the protests, with 57% not happy with how the Prime Minister dealt with proceedings. Conservative Party leaders and the truckers themselves also had a majority disapproving of their handling of the situation. But when it comes to how the protests in Ottawa came to an end, the majority of Canadians, nearly 6 in 10, saying they believe they were dealt with in the best possible way, given the circumstances.
So when we take a look at the Prime Minister's approval in terms of how people believe he actually handled this protest, only 43% actually approve of his performance, which is only 7 points ahead of what the public thinks about how the truckers performed during this, during the protest, which was 36%. So not especially a strong performance here from the Prime Minister. But what's particularly worrying is that 52% of the people that we interviewed said that the Prime Minister's divisive rhetoric and the way that he approached the protest was mostly responsible for what happened. Now, they also looked at other things as being mostly responsible, but it was really surprising to see that level of animosity among the public about how the Prime Minister characterized what was going on with this protest. The surprising part for me is while the truckers don't don't score in the majorities on most things, 46% of the people that we interviewed said that while they may not agree with the tactics, they actually sympathize with the frustration that's being expressed through this. And what's interesting about that is that that's exactly the same number that we had in our polling about 2 weeks ago. So as bad as things got during the course of the protest, it really didn't affect how people felt about the protesters themselves, which was surprising. And also, when you look at the degree of sympathy that exists, for example, like on economic issues and the degree which people are frustrated by that, about 48% of the people that we interviewed said that this protest probably wouldn't have taken place if people weren't feeling the level of economic frustration that they're feeling. And finally, on this point, 54% of the people we interviewed actually agree that the fact that we're reducing or loosening some of the COVID restrictions can be attributed to the fact that these protests took place. So the issue here is that even though authorities may not like it, what they're seeing from the response from the public is actually what the protesters were doing had a certain amount of sympathy among the Canadian population, close to half of the people we interviewed, and on top of that, that it was effective. 54% said it at least had some contributing effect on whether or not we would be loosening the COVID restrictions. The Prime Minister's had a series of choices to make about how he's wanted to characterize people through the course of this pandemic, and he chose a particular path during the election campaign. And once he got out of the election campaign, he kept right on that path and characterized the people who were part of this protest as being like the people that he was criticizing during the election campaign. Now, arguably, he was talking about people who were voting for the opposition parties, particularly the People's Party, but also the Conservative Party. He took exactly that same tack through the course of this protest and preferred to see the people who were protesting in those types of partisan terms. And what we're seeing in these data is not that. It's not that people are particularly united around any sort of partisan choice. This is really a group of the population, roughly 40%, sometimes a bit more than that, sometimes a bit less than that, who really are feeling left out, left behind, and very concerned about the way that the government's not only managing the pandemic, but also the way that the economy is going right now. And really, they have a very challenged sense of hope. But it's not defined in partisan terms. The Prime Minister chose to define it in those terms. And the reaction from the public to that has been quite negative. As we've seen in the polling results, 52% of the population saying he added fuel to the fire. So if people are looking at winners and losers in this, there doesn't seem to be any winners at all. The truckers, at best, opinion divided, usually losing a 60-40 battle, maybe 40% of the population being aligned with them, but not particularly winning. The Prime Minister's performance not seen as particularly good. And in fact, everybody, provincial premiers, the opposition parties, the Conservative Party, not doing particularly well through this at all. So there really are no winners in anything that happened during this protest. This is the most divided and frustrated I can ever remember seeing Canadian public opinion. And it doesn't seem that there's any leadership on the horizon, either in any of the major opposition parties, the Conservatives, the NDP, but particularly in the government, where people would most expect to find leadership, that is making this situation better. So we come out of this series of protests as a very divided, unstable country in terms of how the public is feeling about things right now. And one is looking for signs of hope in the data, and we're just not seeing it.